There is a country at the center of the world that has been conquered, burned, dismantled, and renamed, and has outlived every single force that tried to destroy it. Its empires once stretched from Egypt to India. Its cities were the largest on earth. Its name was spoken with fear in Rome, in Athens, in Baghdad, in Constantinople. And then one day in 1935, a single decree erased that name from every map on the planet. Persia became Iran. But the truth is far stranger than a name change, because the land now called Iran has been rewriting itself for 5,000 years, collapsing and rising, absorbing its conquerors, transforming destruction into identity. And every chapter of its story follows the same unsettling pattern. The same rise, the same peak, the same betrayal from within, and the same fall that somehow becomes a foundation for what comes next. This is the full arc, 5 millennia, compressed into one unbroken thread. Section 1, the forgotten beginning. Long before there was a Persia, there was Elam. Around 3200 BCE, while the Sumerians were building the first cities between the Tigris and the Euphrates, a parallel civilization was forming just to the east, in the highlands and lowlands of what is now southwestern Iran. The Elamites built the city of Susa, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in human history, and developed their own writing system, their own gods, their own laws. At their height, they sacked Babylon. They carried the famous Code of Hammurabi back to Susa as a trophy, where it would remain buried in the earth for thousands of years until French archaeologists dug it up in 1901. Elam lasted in various forms for over 2,000 years, but it did not survive the forces gathering around it. The Assyrians struck from the west. Internal divisions fractured its cities. By the 7th century BCE, Elam had collapsed. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in a long, quiet unraveling. Its cities emptied, its language faded, its name vanished from the records of neighboring powers. What was left behind was not nothing. It was a vacuum. And vacuums on the Iranian plateau do not stay empty for long. Section 2, the Medes and the First Unification. Into this space came the Medes. They were an Iranian-speaking people who had migrated onto the plateau centuries earlier, living in scattered tribal groupings across the mountainous terrain of western Iran. For generations, they had been subjects, paying tribute to the Assyrian Empire, the most brutal military power the ancient world had yet produced. But around 678 BCE, a leader named Darius began consolidating the Median tribes. He built a capital at Ecbatana, modern-day Hamadan. And for the first time, the fragmented Iranian tribes began to think of themselves as something larger than clans. It was his grandson, Cyaxares, who turned that idea into force. In 612 BCE, Cyaxares led a coalition with the Babylonians and destroyed Nineveh, the jewel of the Assyrian Empire. The fall of Nineveh was one of the ancient world's most seismic events. An empire that had terrorized the Near East for centuries was gone in a matter of months. The Medes inherited a vast territory. From eastern Anatolia to the edges of Central Asia, they controlled the largest domain the Iranian plateau had ever known. Yet the Median Empire was built on tribal loyalty, not institutions. Its power rested on the personal authority of its kings. And when that authority wavered, even for a moment, the entire structure was vulnerable. The moment came from within. Section 3, Cyrus and the Birth of Persia. In the southern region of the Median realm, in a territory called Persis, modern-day Fars, there lived a vassal people known as the Persians. They were related to the Medes by language and blood, and for decades they had served loyally under Median rule. Their king was a young man named Cyrus II. In 550 BCE, Cyrus led a rebellion against his own overlord, the Median king Astyages. The Median army, demoralized and divided, defected. Astyages was captured. Ecbatana fell without a siege. In a single stroke, Cyrus had flipped the order of the world. But he did not stop. Over the next 11 years, Cyrus conquered the kingdom of Lydia in western Anatolia, absorbing its legendary wealth. He swept through Central Asia, and in 539 BCE, he marched on Babylon, the greatest city on earth. Babylon fell almost without a fight. The Nabonidus Chronicle, an ancient Babylonian text, records that Cyrus entered the city to a peaceful reception. He then issued what is now known as the Cyrus Cylinder, a declaration inscribed on a clay barrel that proclaimed tolerance for conquered peoples, the restoration of their temples, and the return of their gods. The Jewish captives in Babylon were freed. They returned to Jerusalem and rebuilt their temple. The Achaemenid Empire, as it came to be known, was the largest the world had ever seen. At its height under Cyrus's successors, Cambyses and especially Darius I, it stretched from Libya to the Indus River, from the Aral Sea to the deserts of Egypt. It encompassed roughly 44% of the world's population. 23 subject nations paid tribute. A network of royal roads connected Susa to Sardis, spanning nearly 2,700 kilometers. Messages could cross the empire in a week. Darius built Persepolis, a ceremonial capital of such scale and grandeur that it became the physical expression of Persian identity itself. Delegations from every corner of the empire carved into its stone staircases, each one rendered in distinct dress, carrying distinct gifts. It was not merely a palace, it was an argument that diversity could be governed without erasure. The Achaemenid system was, in many ways, the first working model of empire. Satraps governed distant provinces with local autonomy. A common currency circulated across 3 continents. Religious freedom was, at least in principle, official policy. But the scale that made the empire magnificent also made it fragile. The further power stretched from its center, the thinner it became. And the Greeks, a small, fractious collection of city-states on the empire's western fringe, had already proven, at Marathon and Salamis, that Persian armies were not invincible. The damage was not immediate. The Achaemenid Empire continued for another 150 years after the Greek Wars. But something had cracked. Succession crises became more frequent. Satraps began acting independently. The court at Persepolis became a place of intrigue rather than governance. And then, in 334 BCE, a 22-year-old king from Macedonia crossed the Hellespont with 37,000 soldiers. Section 4, Alexander and the Burning. Alexander of Macedon did not come to negotiate. He defeated the Persian army at Granicus, at Issus, and then decisively at Gaugamela in 331 BCE. The last Achaemenid king, Darius III, fled the battlefield. His empire disintegrated around him. He was murdered by his own officers before Alexander could reach him. Alexander entered Persepolis in January of 330 BCE. The accounts differ on what happened next. Some say it was a calculated act of vengeance, retribution for Xerxes' burning of the Athenian Acropolis 150 years earlier. Others say it began as a drunken revel. What is certain is that the great palace complex of Persepolis was set on fire. The cedar beams that held up the hall of 100 columns burned for days. The stone relief carvings, thousands of them. Cracked in the heat, the ceremonial center of Persian civilization was reduced to ruin. Alexander continued eastward. He conquered everything. But he also adopted Persian dress, married Persian women, integrated Persian nobles into his court. He seemed to understand, even then, that Persia could not simply be destroyed. It had to be absorbed. He died in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32. His empire shattered immediately. His generals carved it into pieces. The lands of Persia fell to Seleucus, one of those generals who founded the Seleucid dynasty. For nearly a century, Greek culture overlaid the Iranian plateau. Greek became the language of administration. Hellenistic cities rose across the landscape. The old Persian ways were pushed to the margins. However, underneath the Greek veneer, something older persisted. The Iranian languages survived. Zoroastrian practices continued in the countryside. The identity of the plateau had not been erased. It had been buried. And buried things, given enough time, pushed through the surface. Section 5. The Parthian Shadow Empire. Around 247 BCE, a nomadic Iranian tribe called the Parni, led by a man named Arsaces, seized a small territory in northeastern Iran. This was the beginning of the Arsacid dynasty, known to history as the Parthians. At first, they were a minor power, confined to a sliver of land between the Seleucid West and the steppe peoples of Central Asia. But as the Seleucid Empire weakened, torn apart by succession wars and Roman pressure, the Parthians expanded methodically, quietly. By the mid-2nd century BCE, under Mithridates I, the Parthians controlled Mesopotamia, Persia, and much of Central Asia. They had, without fanfare, rebuilt something close to the old Achaemenid domain. Their system was decentralized. Local kings ruled their territories with considerable freedom, bound to the Arsacid throne by feudal loyalty rather than direct administration. This made the Parthian Empire flexible, but it also made it dependent on the personal authority of its kings. And the Parthians had a rival that would define their existence for centuries: Rome. In 53 BCE, at the Battle of Carrhae, a Parthian army annihilated a Roman force of over 40,000 men, led by Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Roman history. Crassus was killed. His severed head was reportedly used as a prop in a performance of Euripides at the Parthian court. It was one of Rome's worst military disasters. For the next 250 years, Rome and Parthia fought a grinding series of wars across Mesopotamia and Armenia. Neither could destroy the other. The frontier between them became one of the most contested borders in the ancient world. But the true threat to Parthia was not Rome. It was internal decay. The feudal system that gave the empire flexibility also gave ambitious vassals the tools for rebellion. The Arsacid kings grew weaker. Provincial lords grew stronger. In 224 CE, a vassal lord from the old Persian heartland of Fars, the same region that had produced Cyrus, rose in revolt. His name was Ardashir. He claimed descent from a legendary figure named Sasan. The last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, was killed in battle. The Arsacid dynasty, which had ruled for nearly 5 centuries, was over. And in its place stood something that claimed to be the true heir of everything that had come before. Section 6, the Sassanid Revival. The Sassanid Empire was, from its first day, a deliberate act of restoration. Ardashir I did not merely conquer the Parthians. He declared himself the rightful successor to the Achaemenids, reaching back across 500 years of Hellenistic and Parthian rule to claim a lineage that may or may not have been real. It did not matter. What mattered was the narrative. Persia had returned. Zoroastrianism, which had survived the Hellenistic and Parthian periods in reduced form, was now elevated to the state religion with a formal clergy, standardized texts, and fire temples built across the empire. The Sassanids created a centralized bureaucracy, a professional standing army, and a class system that organized society into priests, warriors, scribes, and commoners. Under Shapur I, the empire expanded dramatically. In 260 CE, Shapur defeated and captured the Roman Emperor Valerian, the only time in history a Roman emperor was taken prisoner on the battlefield. Rock reliefs at Nakhche Rostam show Shapur on horseback, with Valerian kneeling before him. The image was carved into stone to last forever. The Sassanid period is often called the Golden Age of pre-Islamic Iran. Art, architecture, music, literature, and science flourished. The Academy of Gundashapur became one of the ancient world's most important centers of learning, where Greek, Indian, and Persian medical and philosophical traditions merged. The game of chess in its earliest form was developed in Sassanid Persia. At its peak, the empire stretched from the Euphrates to the borders of India, from the Caucasus to the shores of the Arabian Peninsula. It was Rome's only true equal. And after Rome fell in the west, the Sassanids faced the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, in a rivalry that lasted centuries. But that rivalry would prove fatal. In the early 7th century, the Sassanid king Khosrow II launched a devastating war against Byzantium. His armies conquered Jerusalem, Egypt, and Anatolia. For a brief moment, the Sassanid Empire seemed to have surpassed every previous Persian state. Yet the war exhausted both empires. Khosrow II was overthrown by his own nobles and murdered in 628. In the space of 4 years, over a dozen claimants fought for the Sassanid throne. The army was depleted, the treasury was empty, the irrigation systems that sustained Mesopotamian agriculture had been neglected during decades of war. The Sassanid Empire, at the height of its ambition, had hollowed itself out. And from the south, from the deserts of Arabia, a place the Sassanids had never considered a serious threat, something was coming. Section 7. The Arab Conquest and the Longest Silence. The armies that arrived from Arabia in the 630s were unlike anything the Sassanids had faced. They were fast, motivated, and held together by a new faith, Islam. That had unified the Arabian Peninsula in less than a generation. In 636, at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, a Sassanid army was routed by the forces of the Rashidun Caliphate. The Sassanid capital at Ctesiphon fell shortly after. The last Sassanid king, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward, trying to rally resistance. He was murdered in 651, according to some accounts, by a miller near Merv for his possessions. He was 31 years old. The Sassanid Empire, which had lasted over 4 centuries, was gone in less than 20 years. What followed was not a clean replacement. It was a slow transformation. The Arab conquerors imposed Islam, but they also absorbed. The administrative systems of the Sassanids were adopted wholesale by the new caliphate. Persian scribes and bureaucrats ran the Umayyad state machinery. The Arabic script was adapted to write the Persian language. For the first 2 centuries of Islamic rule, Persians occupied a subordinate position. Classified as Mawali, non-Arab converts to Islam, with fewer rights than their Arab rulers. Resentment built quietly. In 750, that resentment found its moment. The Abbasid Revolution, which overthrew the Umayyad Caliphate, was heavily supported by Persian converts from the eastern province of Khorasan. The new Abbasid capital was built at Baghdad, just 30 kilometers from the ruins of the old Sassanid capital at Ctesiphon. Persian culture, its poetry, its bureaucratic traditions, its intellectual heritage, became the backbone of the Abbasid Golden Age. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, that legendary center of translation and scholarship, was populated by scholars who drew deeply on Sassanid-era texts. Persia had lost its political independence, but it had colonized the culture of its conquerors. Over time, local Iranian dynasties began to emerge within the Islamic world. The Tahirids, the Safavids, the Samanids, ruling as semi-autonomous governors under the caliphate's nominal authority. The Samanids, based in Bukhara, patronized the revival of the Persian language in written form, now rendered in Arabic script. It was under Samanid patronage that Ferdowsi began composing the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, an epic poem of 60,000 couplets that retold the mythical and historical story of Iran from creation to the Arab conquest. Ferdowsi wrote almost entirely in pure Persian, deliberately avoiding Arabic loanwords. The Shahnameh was not merely literature, it was an act of cultural survival. But this cultural renaissance existed within a world that was about to be shattered. Section 8. The Mongol Annihilation. In 1219, the Khwarezmian Empire, which controlled much of Persia and Central Asia, made a catastrophic error. Its governor in the border city of Atrar executed a Mongol trade caravan and then murdered the ambassador Genghis Khan sent to demand reparations. What followed was not a war, it was an extinction event. Genghis Khan invaded with an army estimated at 100,000 to 150,000 men. City after city fell. Bukhara was burned. Samarkand surrendered and was still devastated. The cities of Khorasan, Merv, Nishapur, Herat were each subjected to systematic destruction. At Nishapur, the Mongols reportedly killed every living thing: men, women, children, dogs, cats. The skulls were stacked into pyramids. Modern historians estimate that the Mongol invasions killed between 10 and 15 million people across the Iranian plateau in Central Asia. Some regions did not recover their pre-invasion population levels for centuries. The sophisticated irrigation systems of Khorasan, built over generations, were destroyed and never fully rebuilt. Agricultural land reverted to desert. Genghis Khan died in 1227, but the Mongol presence in Persia intensified. In 1258, his grandson Hulagu sacked Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. The caliph was executed, wrapped in a carpet and trampled by horses, according to tradition, so that no royal blood would touch the earth. The Tigris was said to have run black with ink from the destroyed libraries and red with the blood of scholars. Hulagu established the Ilkhanate, a Mongol state that ruled Persia for roughly 80 years. And here the old pattern reasserted itself. The conquerors began to assimilate. Mongol rulers converted to Islam. They patronized Persian art and architecture. Persian became the administrative language of the Ilkhanate. The conquerors, once again, were absorbed. But the damage had been done. Persia in the 13th and 14th centuries was a diminished place, depopulated, fragmented, and vulnerable. And into that vulnerability rode Timur. Section 9, on Timur and the Second Destruction. Timur, known in the West as Tamerlan, was a Turco-Mongol warlord from Samarkand who claimed descent from Genghis Khan's lineage. In the 1380s, he swept across Persia with an army built for conquest and little else. At Isfahan in 1387, the city initially surrendered peacefully. But when the population revolted against the taxes imposed by Timur's garrison, the response was total. Timur ordered a massacre. Each soldier was assigned a quota of heads. Contemporary sources claim that 70,000 skulls were piled into towers outside the city walls. Timur's campaigns across Persia, Mesopotamia, India, and Anatolia left a trail of devastation that rivaled the Mongols. Cities that had just begun to recover from Hulagu's invasions were destroyed again. The brief cultural recovery of the Ilkhanate period was erased. After Timur's death in 1405, his empire fragmented. His descendants, the Timurids, did, in their own way, become patrons of Persian culture. The court at Herat became a center of miniature painting, poetry, and architecture. The pattern held: destruction followed by absorption, followed by a flowering that carried Persian identity forward. However, the Timurid period was unstable. Rival factions fought constantly. Central authority weakened. And on the western edge of the Iranian world, a new force was coalescing. One that would reshape Persia more fundamentally than any conqueror before. Section 10, the Safavids, and the making of modern Iran. In 1501, a 15-year-old boy named Ismail rode into Tabriz at the head of a fanatical army of Turkmen warriors known as the Qizilbash, the Redheads, named for their distinctive crimson headgear. Ismail claimed descent from both Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, and from a Sufi mystical order based in Ardabil. He conquered Azerbaijan, then Persia, then Iraq, and upon taking power, he made a decision that would define Iran for the next 5 centuries. He declared Twelver Shia Islam the state religion. At the time, the majority of the population in the Iranian lands was Sunni. The conversion was not voluntary. Sunni scholars were given a choice: convert, leave, or die. Shia clerics were imported from Lebanon and Bahrain to teach the new doctrine. Mosques were rededicated. Rituals were changed. Public cursing of the first 3 Sunni caliphs was institutionalized. The Safavid conversion created for the first time a distinct religious identity that separated Iran from the Ottoman Empire to the west and the Mughal Empire to the east. Both Sunni, it drew a border in faith that had not existed before. That border still exists. Under Shah Abbas I, who ruled from 1588 to 1629, the Safavid Empire reached its zenith. Abbas moved the capital to Isfahan and transformed it into one of the most beautiful cities on earth. The Imam Mosque, the Ali Kapı Palace, the Sheikh el-Sutun. These were built not merely as monuments, but as statements of civilizational confidence. Isfahan's population reached 500,000. European diplomats called it half the world. Abbas also modernized the military, broke the power of the Qizilbash tribal chiefs, centralized administration, and established diplomatic and trade relationships with European powers. But the Safavid system depended on strong kings, and strong kings did not always come. After Abbas, the dynasty weakened. Succession disputes became chronic. The later Safavid Shahs, raised in the seclusion of the harem, had little experience of governance. The clergy, empowered by the conversion, grew increasingly independent of royal authority. In 1722, an Afghan tribal army, a small force from Kandahar, marched across eastern Persia and besieged Isfahan. The siege lasted 6 months. An estimated 80,000 people died of starvation. The last Safavid Shah surrendered. A dynasty that had remade the soul of Persia collapsed before a force that, on paper, should never have reached its capital. Section 11. chaos, quagers, and the age of humiliation. What followed the Safavid collapse was a half-century of chaos. Nader Shah, a military genius from Khorasan, briefly reunified Persia and even invaded India, sacking Delhi in 1739 and returning with the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor Diamond. But his empire died with him. He was assassinated by his own officers in 1747. The Zand dynasty provided a brief period of stability under Karim Khan, who ruled from Shiraz and refused to take the title of Shah. After his death, the cycle repeated: civil war, fragmentation, power vacuums. In 1796, the Qajars, a Turkmen tribal dynasty, seized control. They would rule Iran for 130 years and preside over what many Iranians consider the darkest chapter of their modern history. The Qajar period was defined by loss. In two devastating wars with Russia, the Russo-Persian Wars of 1804 to 1813 and 1826 to 1828, Iran lost the Caucasus territories, modern-day Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and parts of Dagestan. The treaties of Gulistan and Turkmenchai stripped Iran of vast territories and imposed humiliating capitulations. Foreign powers gained the right to try their own citizens on Iranian soil. Britain and Russia turned Iran into a chessboard. The great game between the two empires was played, in part, across Iranian territory. Concessions were sold to foreign companies. The Reuter Concession of 1872, which gave a British citizen control over Iran's industries, minerals, railways, and banks, was so sweeping that even the Russian government protested. The Qajar Shahs lived lavishly while the country bled. They traveled to Europe, accumulated debts, and sold concessions to finance their lifestyles. The gap between Iran's imperial memory and its present humiliation became unbearable. In 1906, a broad coalition of merchants, clerics, and intellectuals forced the last effective Qajar Shah to accept a constitution. The Constitutional Revolution established a parliament, the Majlis, and for a brief moment, Iran seemed poised to join the modern world on its own terms. But the parliament was weak. The Shah attempted a counter-coup. Russian troops bombarded the Majlis building. The constitutional experiment was crushed, revived, and crushed again. By the time World War I swept across the region, Iran, officially neutral, was occupied by British, Russian, and Ottoman forces simultaneously. Famine killed an estimated 2 million people, roughly a quarter of the population. The Qajar dynasty did not fall in revolution. It simply became too weak to stand. Section 12. The Pahlavis and the name change. In 1921, a military officer named Reza Khan staged a coup and marched into Tehran. By 1925, he had deposed the last Qajar Shah and crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, founding a new dynasty. Reza Shah was a modernizer in the mold of Ataturk. He built Iran's first railroad, established a national army, created a secular legal code, and forced the adoption of Western dress. He banned the veil. He stripped the clergy of much of their educational and judicial authority. He built universities and sent students abroad. And in 1935, he issued a decree that formally requested all foreign governments to use the name Iran instead of Persia. The name was not new. Iranians had always called their country Iran, from the Middle Persian Aran meaning land of the Aryans, a term that referred to the Iranian peoples and had been in use since the Sassanid era. Persia was an external label derived from the Greek Persis, the name of the southern province, Fars, where the Achaemenid dynasty originated. To the outside world, the land had been Persia. To its own people, it had always been Iran. The 1935 decree was a statement of sovereignty. It was also an act of identity, a deliberate break with the image of a weakened, colonized Persia, and an assertion that the country would define itself by its own name. But Reza Shah's modernization was authoritarian, and his sympathies during World War II were ambiguous. In 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran, deposed Reza Shah, and installed his 21-year-old son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, as the new Shah. Reza Shah was exiled to South Africa, where he died in 1944. The new Shah was initially a weak figure, dependent on foreign support, Iran's oil. Discovered in 1908 and controlled by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which would later become BP, was the prize that made the country a target. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized Iran's oil industry, claiming for Iran what Iran had been denied for decades. He was enormously popular. His government represented the closest thing Iran had to a functioning democracy. It lasted 2 years. In August 1953, a coup organized by the CIA and MI6, Operation Ajax, overthrew Mossadegh and restored the Shah to full power. The operation was covert, but its consequences were anything but. The Shah, now unchecked, built an authoritarian state backed by Safavid, a secret police trained by American and Israeli intelligence. Political opposition was crushed. The clergy, the left, the nationalists, all were driven underground. The Shah launched the White Revolution in 1963, a sweeping program of land reform, industrialization, and women's suffrage designed to modernize Iran from above. The economy grew, oil revenues surged, Tehran became a city of highways, high-rises, and Western consumer culture. Yet the faster the surface modernized, the deeper the fractures ran. The land reforms displaced millions of peasants who flooded into cities unprepared for them. The clergy, led by an exiled Ayatollah named Ruhollah Khomeini, channeled widespread resentment against the Shah's secularism, his Western alliances, and his repressive apparatus. The modernization was real, the prosperity was measurable, the resentment was invisible, until it was not. Section 13, the Revolution and the Rewriting. In January 1978, a government-published article insulted Khomeini. Protests erupted in Qom. The security forces killed several demonstrators. 40 days later, in keeping with Shia mourning traditions, memorial protests were held. Those protests were also met with violence. Another 40-day cycle began, then another. The revolution moved in pulses, each one larger and more determined than the last. By the autumn of 1978, strikes had paralyzed the oil industry, the economic engine of the entire state. Millions marched in the streets of Tehran. The army, vast and well-equipped, began to fracture. Soldiers refused to fire on demonstrators. On January 16, 1979, the Shah left Iran. He called it a vacation. He never returned. On February 1st, Khomeini flew back from exile in Paris. An estimated 5 million people filled the streets of Tehran to greet him. Within weeks, the monarchy was dissolved. A national referendum, held in March, approved the establishment of an Islamic Republic by a reported 98%. A new constitution was written. Khomeini was installed as supreme leader, a position with authority over the military, the judiciary, and the elected government. The leftists, the liberals, the nationalists who had marched alongside the Islamists were systematically sidelined. Many were imprisoned, some were executed. The revolution, which had been a broad coalition, narrowed into theocratic control. In November 1979, students loyal to Khomeini's line stormed the American embassy in Tehran and held 52 diplomats hostage for 444 days. The hostage crisis severed Iran's relationship with the West and cemented the revolution's confrontational identity. Then came the war. In September 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran, expecting a quick victory against a country in revolutionary chaos. The war lasted 8 years. It killed an estimated 500,000 people on both sides. Iran sent waves of young volunteers, some barely teenagers, into minefields and machine gun fire. Chemical weapons were used on Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians. The international community largely looked away. The war ended in 1988 with no territorial changes. Khomeini accepted the ceasefire and compared it to drinking poison. He died the following year. What remained was the Islamic Republic, an entity built on the bones of the revolution, the trauma of the war, and a theocratic structure unlike anything else in the modern world. A supreme leader above a president, a guardian council that vets candidates before elections, a revolutionary guard that operates as a parallel military and economic power, a society caught between its ancient identity, its Islamic framework, and its desire for modernity. Closing. The thread. The pattern across 5,000 years has never truly broken. A power rises on the Iranian plateau. It consolidates. It reaches a peak of ambition or achievement. It is destroyed by Greeks, by Arabs, by Mongols, by its own contradictions. And then, from the wreckage, something new emerges that carries the old identity forward in a different form. Elam gave way to the Medes gave way to the Achaemenids. The Achaemenids were burned by Alexander, and still the culture survived the Seleucids. The Parthians rebuilt what the Greeks could not hold. The Sassanids reclaimed what the Parthians had let loosen. The Arab conquest erased the political order, but could not erase the language, the poetry, the memory. The Mongols killed millions, and still Persian literature, Persian art, and Persian administration re-emerged within the Mongol courts. The Safavids rewrote the faith. The Pahlavis rewrote the name. The revolution rewrote the government. And through every one of these cycles, one thing endured. The idea that the land between the Zagros Mountains and the deserts of the East is not merely a territory. It is a civilization, one that has outlasted every empire, including its own. Persia became Iran not in 1935, with a diplomatic decree. It became Iran through 5 millennia of refusal to disappear, through fire and invasion and reinvention, through the quiet, relentless insistence that no matter what name the world uses, the thing itself remains. The towers of Persepolis are broken, the fire temples are empty, the libraries of Baghdad are gone, the revolutionaries of 1979 are old men. But the plateau endures, as it has for 5,000 years, as it likely will for 5,000 more.